Chad Brenley walked into the all-hands meeting 4 minutes late, shook hands with the CEO like they were at a backyard barbecue, and said, "Diana's done incredible things here, but we need a hunter in this seat, not a farmer." The room had 60 people in it. He was talking about the EVP of Revenue role, the role I had spent 3 years building the case for. He was wearing a Patagonia fleece vest in a meeting about the future of the company's revenue engine, and he said hunter and farmer the way people say it when they read it in an airport book and never looked up whether it was true. I was sitting 8 feet from him. I nodded once, because I already knew something about Chad Brenley that Chad Brenley did not know about himself. If this is the kind of story you've been waiting to hear, where patience beats proximity every single time, like and subscribe. Because this one does not end where Chad thinks it ends. My name was Diana Voss. I was 46 years old. And for 11 years I had been the load-bearing wall inside Corrigan Logistics Technology, whether the org chart reflected that or not. Corrigan was a B2B logistics software company based in Columbus, Ohio. We built fleet routing optimization, carrier compliance platforms, last-mile visibility tools, and supply chain exception management systems for mid to large shippers, 3PLs, and regional carriers who needed their freight to behave predictably in a world that did not. We were not the largest name in the space. We were the most reliable one. That reputation was not accidental. I joined Corrigan when we had 280 employees, $34 million in annual recurring revenue, and 3 enterprise accounts we were actively trying not to lose because our product had just come off a painful 18-month rebuild. I came from a regional 3PL where I had spent 8 years learning that logistics technology clients do not buy software. They buy certainty. They buy the belief that the platform will behave on a Tuesday in November when 14 things go wrong at once and someone's freight is stuck in a Memphis yard. My title when I joined was Director of Enterprise Accounts. Within 3 years, it was Senior Director. By year 7, I carried the title Senior Director of Enterprise Partnerships, which was a longer phrase for the same thing, except now I also built the framework that governed how those partnerships were structured, renewed, and protected. The weapon I built was called the Client Anchor Protocol. That requires some explanation, and the explanation is important. Corrigan had, by year 6 of my tenure, landed 3 accounts that together represented $41.2 million of our $89 million in annual recurring revenue. Not 41% of revenue, 46%. Those 3 accounts were Hartfield Distribution, a southeastern 3PL with 14 regional hubs. Bexler National Freight, a carrier consortium with 6 subsidiary brands. And OmniLink Supply Partners, a last-mile coordination network tied to 3 large retail chains. All 3 had come through me. Not through marketing. Not through a sales team. Through 4 years of relationship development, proposal iteration, contract negotiation, and the kind of unglamorous account management that requires you to know a client's operations better than their own VP of logistics at 11 p.m. during a weather event. I had personally re-signed all 3 accounts at expanded contract values. Hartfield, from $7.2 million to $14.8 million annually. Bexler, from $6.9 million to $11.4 million. OmniLink, from $9.2 million to $15 million, plus a 3-year commitment with an automatic renewal clause I had negotiated in year 9 when their internal procurement team cycled out and I knew the incoming team would want to renegotiate everything. That automatic renewal clause was my idea. So was the rest of the Client Anchor Protocol. Here is what it was. Beginning in year 7, when I renegotiated each of the 3 master service agreements at renewal, I introduced language into the relationship governance section of each contract. It was not complicated language. It was 2 paragraphs in each MSA under the heading Designated Relationship Custodian. The section named me, Diana Voss, Senior Director of Enterprise Partnerships at Corrigan Logistics Technology, as the Designated Relationship Custodian for the account. It specified that the DRC was responsible for all material relationship decisions, contract interpretation requests, escalation authority, and renewal negotiation. Then it said this, in clear language, that Corrigan's legal team had reviewed and approved because they thought it was a client service quality commitment rather than a structural protection. Any material change to the designated relationship custodian, defined as removal, reassignment, or reduction of the DRC's authority over the account, required either written client consent or a 90-day advance notice period during which the client retained the right to initiate a full renegotiation of commercial terms, written consent, or 90 days and a full renegotiation. I had introduced this language because I had watched what happened to enterprise accounts when their primary relationship contact changed without warning. Clients turned. Not because the new person was bad, because relationships have architecture, and when you remove the architecture without permission, the building becomes negotiable. I put the language in to protect continuity for the client. All 3 clients had signed it. None of them objected to the language because from their perspective it was simply a service quality guarantee. We were promising them that we would not quietly reassign their account to whoever had time. Corrigan's legal team had flagged it, mildly, in year 7 as an unusual clause. I explained the client service rationale. They approved it. They did not realize, because nobody asked them to think about it this way, that the clause also meant you could not restructure the revenue organization in a way that displaced the DRC without triggering a 90-day renegotiation window across 46% of the company's recurring revenue. I was the DRC. For all 3 accounts. I had not designed it as a weapon. I had designed it as a promise. The fact that it was also a weapon was simply what happens when someone who understands architecture builds in a load-bearing clause. The culture at Corrigan before Chad Brenly was not perfect. Number 11-year professional history ever is. But it was functional in the ways that matter. Our CEO, Matt Corrigan, had built the company from a dispatch software startup into a mid-market enterprise platform. He was a decent strategist and a capable fundraiser. He was also, increasingly, a man who preferred the company of people who made him feel like the smartest person in the room, which is a preference that tends to have organizational consequences. Our CRO before Chad had been a woman named Lynette Parsons. Lynette had been rigorous, demanding, and fair in the specific way of people who track numbers because they respect what numbers tell the truth about. She had built the sales motion that landed Bexler and OmniLink. She had trusted me with both accounts. When Lynette left for a competitor in year 9, the CRO role sat open for 6 months while I ran enterprise revenue functionally, without title, without additional compensation, and with the understanding, expressed in 3 separate conversations with Matt, that the restructuring was a formality and that I was the obvious internal candidate. Matt said, "You're absolutely who I'm thinking about for this." He said that 3 times across 6 months. Then he hired Chad Brenly as EVP of Revenue, which was the same role with a different title, and installed him above me with a direct reporting line to Matt and a compensation package I was never shown but heard about through accounting 3 months later. $340,000 base. Mine was $187,000. Chad Brenly was 38. He had gone to Ohio State, which is where Matt had gone, which is how the story usually starts when you are trying to understand why someone got a job. They had been in the same business fraternity. They had remained close in the post-collegiate way of men who build their professional networks inside the relationships they formed at 21. Chad had spent the intervening years in sales leadership roles at 3 different software companies, none of which he had stayed at for longer than 3 years. And one of which had been acquired 8 months after he left in a deal that involved some earnout controversy he did not mention in his LinkedIn summary. He was not incompetent in a visible, catastrophic way. That would have been too obvious. He was incompetent in the specific way of people who have been insulated from the downstream effects of their decisions. He was good at the opening pitch. He was good at the dinner, the energy, the conviction-forward presentation. He was bad at the details, the follow-through, the client who calls on a Thursday with an operational issue that does not fit a slide deck. He was tall, in good shape in the way of men who treat the gym as branding, and dressed in what I would describe as startup business casual, good jeans, clean sneakers, fleece, or quarter zip depending on the season. The kind of wardrobe that works well in early-stage environments where everything is still being invented and works poorly in enterprise software where the client is a CFO who has seen 40 versions of you. He held himself with the specific posture of a man who had walked into most rooms already believing the outcome. His first week, he asked me to download everything I knew about the top accounts. Not brief me. Download everything. He said it across a conference room table in front of 3 other people, the way you say it when you want an assistant rather than a colleague. I said, happy to walk you through the account structures. He said, great, yeah, and if you can put it in a deck that would help a lot. I put nothing in a deck. I scheduled 3 separate account briefings with him, walked him through each client's history, contract structure, operational dependencies, escalation preferences, and renewal timelines, and watched him take notes in a way that suggested he was writing things he intended to ask someone else later. He also said, in our second briefing, the line that told me everything I needed to know about his relationship with what I actually did. He looked up from his notebook at the OmniLink contract section on my screen and said, do we really need all these clauses? This is the kind of thing that slows down renewal cycles. I said, some of these clauses protect the client's confidence in service continuity. He said, sure, but relationship confidence should come from the relationship, not the paper. He said that with real conviction. I looked at him and said nothing. Because sometimes the most productive response to a man explaining how bridges work to the person who built the bridge is to let him finish. The all-hands meeting was 7 months into Chad's tenure. He had spent those 7 months doing a number of things. He had restructured the sales team, replacing 2 senior account managers with younger, cheaper hires from his previous company. He had introduced a new CRM workflow that required more data entry from the account team and produced less actionable insight because it had been designed for a transactional sales environment, not an enterprise relationship model. He had also, in the previous 3 weeks, been running a revenue architecture review with a 2-person strategy consulting firm he had brought in, who had produced a slide deck recommending that Corrigan consolidate enterprise account ownership under a centralized revenue success model with Chad at the top and a tier of newer account executives below. The new model did not include a senior director of enterprise partnerships role. It did not include me. I knew this because the deck had been accidentally forwarded to me by a junior analyst who thought I was already in the loop, which meant Chad had spent 3 weeks designing an org that excluded me and had not told me. The all hands was his announcement vehicle. He stood at the front of the room with a slide showing the new revenue org, talked about transformation and scalability, said the hunter-farmer line, and used my name as a compliment while describing a function I would no longer be filling. Matt Corrigan sat in the front row and nodded. I sat 8 feet from Chad and watched 11 years of invisible infrastructure get described as farming. Then he said, we'll have individual conversations with affected team members over the next week. 60 people in the room. Some of them looked at me. I did not look back at them. I looked at my notebook. Then I wrote one line in the margin. 90-day renegotiation window. All 3 accounts. After the meeting, people gathered in small, careful groups the way they do when a room has just been changed and nobody wants to be the first to acknowledge it out loud. A few colleagues touched my arm or gave me looks that were meant to communicate solidarity and produced mostly the feeling of being a sympathy card. I thanked them. Chad caught me at the door. Diana, he said, I want to sit down with you this week and talk about your role in the new structure. Of course, I said. He looked relieved. Like I was going to be reasonable. I know this is a change, he said. But there's a real opportunity for. Send me a calendar invite, I said. Then I walked to the elevator. I did not take the meeting that week. Rita in HR rescheduled it twice due to Chad's availability, which gave me 11 days of breathing room I used appropriately. That evening I drove home. 41 minutes, highway. The specific dullness of Ohio Interstate at rush hour that had always been secretly useful for thinking. I made pasta with garlic and olive oil because it required attention at a low level. My dog, a 7-year-old lab mix named Booth, sat near the stove at the distance that signals hope without demanding it. I ate. I fed him. I sat in the reading chair in the living room and opened my laptop. The client anchor protocol language was in my personal files. I had kept a clean copy for 4 years. Not for drama. For the same reason you keep good documentation of anything that matters. I read it once to confirm what I already knew. Then I called my attorney, a contract specialist named Paul Fenn, who had reviewed the original MSA language when I drafted it in year 7. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what had happened. The all hands. The new structure. The elimination of my role. The timeline. He said, "And you're still employed?" "For now." "Has anything been put in writing yet?" "Not yet. They're scheduled to sit down with me this week." "Don't take the meeting until we talk tomorrow." "Is the DRC language in all 3 MSAs still in effect?" "All 3. Most recent renewals 14 months ago." I heard him exhale slowly. "Diana," he said, "you understand what happens if they restructure your role out from under you?" "Yes." "They trigger the 90-day window in all 3 accounts simultaneously." "Yes." "Have they been notified?" "No." "Do they know the clause exists?" Chad called it the kind of clause that slows down renewal cycles. Paul laughed. Quietly, professionally. The laugh of a man who had seen expensive ignorance before. "Tomorrow," he said. 9 a.m. I'll be there. I closed the laptop. Booth was asleep on the rug near the couch. The apartment was quiet. The street outside had that particular Thursday evening Columbus sound, occasional traffic, someone's radio, the distant rhythm of a neighborhood settling. I set my alarm for 7:15, made sure my work phone was on silent, and slept until it went off. Stage 1 of the unraveling happened before I had taken Paul's call. At 8:42 a.m. the Friday after the all hands, Chad's new revenue architecture was formalized in an internal HR document and sent to me via email with an attached offer to transition into a senior account manager role. Senior account manager. Not senior director. Not the same tier. Not the same anything. The pay band for the new role was $134,000 to $158,000 base. He had cut my title and was cutting my salary by at least $29,000. The email said, "We believe this role plays to your strengths and positions you well within the new structure." Paul and I had met that morning. He had reviewed the DRC clauses again and confirmed what we both already knew. He also confirmed a second thing that I had not fully internalized until he said it out loud. The organizational change constituted a material change to the DRC under the contract language. Specifically, reassigning account authority from me to a new tier of junior account executives under Chad's structure would eliminate my authority over the account, triggering the client notification requirement. That notification was my professional responsibility to send. Not Chad's. Not Matt's. Not legal's. Mine. Because I was the DRC. Paul helped me draft the 3 notifications. They were not dramatic. They were factual. They informed each client that Corrigan Logistics Technology was implementing an organizational change that would result in a material modification to designated relationship custodian authority for their account, and that under Section 12.4 of their MSA, they were entitled to either provide written consent to the transition or initiate a 90-day renegotiation period for their commercial terms. We sent them at 2:17 p.m. on a Friday. I then submitted my formal notice to HR that I would not be accepting the senior account manager role and that my resignation would be effective in 30 days. At 3:04 p.m., I received a red receipt from Hartfield Distribution's VP of Operations, a woman named Carol Westbrook who had known me for 9 years and who I had every confidence would read the clause carefully. At 3:11 p.m., I received a reply from Bexler National Freight's head of procurement. The reply said, "Diana, we've flagged this to our legal team. Can we speak Monday?" At 3:29 p.m., nothing from OmniLink yet. I drove home. I made soup and ate it while watching a nature documentary about migratory birds, which was deeply calming in the way that watching something move with complete indifference to corporate org charts tends to be. Booth slept on the rug. My phone did not ring because the clients had not called Chad yet. That changed Monday. The first stage of actual panic began at 9:08 a.m. when Carol Westbrook from Hartfield called the main Corrigan sales line asking to speak with someone about a contract notification they had received regarding their account management structure. The receptionist transferred her to Chad. Carol told him, professionally and directly, that Hartfield had received a formal notification of a material DRC change and that their legal team was reviewing whether to consent or initiate the renegotiation window. Chad said, "I'm sorry, a DRC what?" That sentence. That exact sentence. He apparently recovered enough to say he would look into it and then called his assistant, who pulled up the Hartfield MSA, who found Section 12.4, who printed it and put it on Chad's desk. And by 9:41 a.m. Chad was reading 2 paragraphs of contract language that he had told me 7 months ago were the kind of thing that slowed down renewal cycles. He called Matt at 9:43 a.m. Matt called legal at 9:47 a.m. Legal found the same language in 5 minutes because it had been in the file the whole time. The attorney on the Hartfield account, a quiet man named Stephen Park, apparently read the clause, put the file down, and asked if there was a full DRC contract log. There was. All three accounts. At 10:12 a.m., Bexler's procurement had called in. At 11:03 a.m., OmniLink's VP of Supply Chain Operations, a meticulous man named Frank Daly who had negotiated the original contract with me and knew his documents better than most, called and said he had reviewed the notification, spoken with their general counsel, and they would be initiating the 90-day renegotiation window per Section 12.4 rather than providing written consent. Just like that. 46% of Corrigan's recurring revenue, $41.2 million annually, entered a 90-day renegotiation window. Not because anyone had done anything wrong. Because the contract said they could. Because I had written the contract. My phone rang at 10:17 a.m. Chad. I did not answer. At 10:38 a.m., a text from Chad. "Diana, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can you call me?" At 11:12 a.m., another text. "Diana, please call me. This is urgent." At 11:45 a.m., a text from Matt Corrigan himself. "Diana, would you have time for a quick call today?" Quick call. The same man who had told me 3 times that I was obviously who he was thinking about for the CRO role, and then hired his college roommate, now wanted a quick call. I texted back, "I'm with counsel. Please contact Paul Fenn," and sent Paul's number. Stage 2 began Tuesday when legal tried to argue the notifications were invalid. Stephen Park was not incompetent. He was thorough and careful. But the argument he tried to construct required that the DRC clause had not been properly triggered, which required that my role had not been materially changed, which required pretending that a reduction from Senior Director of Enterprise Partnerships to Senior Account Manager was a lateral move rather than a structural displacement. That was a difficult argument. Carol Westbrook's legal team had already used the word material twice in writing. Bexler's procurement attorney had asked for the full organizational chart changes in writing, which legal provided, which confirmed that my title, authority, and compensation band had all changed. OmniLink had already filed the renegotiation notice. Stephen called Paul. Paul told me the call lasted 43 minutes, most of which was Stephen trying 4 different theories of why the clause had not been triggered and Paul explaining, without malice, why each one did not hold under the plain language of the contract. At the end, Stephen asked, "Is there any way to get Diana on a call?" Paul said, "Tell me what you're offering and I'll ask her." Stephen said, "We just want to understand what she wants." Paul said, "She already resigned. She's not trying to stay." A long pause. "Then what does she want?" "That's for your principals to ask her properly." Wednesday was stage 3, and stage 3 was when the numbers became visible. Because the renegotiation window was not a courtesy. It was contractual. Under Section 12.4, once a client filed notice of renegotiation, all automatic pricing escalators, upsell additions, and renewal lock-in terms were suspended for 90 days. If renegotiation did not reach signed agreement within 90 days, the client had the right to exit at current pricing with 30 days written notice. OmniLink had already filed. Their current contract was $15 million annually. Their 3-year commitment had been Corrigan's single most valuable revenue anchor. Under a renegotiation scenario with a company that now had no DRC and no one who understood the operational relationship the way I did, the realistic risk was not just a price reduction. It was a competitive rebid. And OmniLink was large enough that two of Corrigan's direct competitors would write them a very compelling proposal in 90 days, if given the chance. Our CFO, Rachel Huang, who had always been precise and uninterested in politics, ran the exposure analysis Wednesday afternoon. Worst case, $41.2 million in ARR destabilized across 3 accounts simultaneously during renegotiation. Conservative realistic, $18 million to $24 million at risk if pricing was renegotiated and upsells were abandoned. Even case, $11 million in ARR reduction if 2 of the 3 accounts renewed at lower terms. Rachel sent the analysis to Matt and CC Chad and Steven. I heard about it through Paul, who heard about it from Steven, who was apparently trying to find a path that did not involve acknowledging the full scope of what had just happened. There was no such path. Because Wednesday afternoon, at 3:51 p.m., Hartfield Distribution sent a formal response. They were not initiating renegotiation. They were consenting to the transition. But the consent was conditional. They would consent only if Diana Voss remained the designated account contact at Corrigan in a senior capacity with full relationship authority for a minimum of 12 months. Not someone with my title. Me. By name. Carol Westbrook's legal team had written 3 sentences that did more work than anything Chad had produced in 7 months. Stage 4 arrived Thursday when Matt called for an emergency leadership meeting. Not a quick call. An emergency meeting. Chad, Matt, Rachel, Steven, and Garrett Lee, the board's lead independent director, who had flown in from Chicago and whose presence told everyone in the room that the board now knew exactly what had happened and had opinions about it. I was not in that meeting, but I had detailed notes from Paul and a second-hand account from Rachel, who called me that evening because she was the kind of person who believed in accurate information more than institutional loyalty. According to Rachel, Chad opened by saying the client notifications were unauthorized and represented an attempt by a departing employee to leverage proprietary contracts. Garrett asked if the contract language was valid. Steven said yes. Garrett asked if Diana had been the designated DRC. Steven said yes. Garrett asked if the organizational change had materially altered her role. Steven said yes. Garrett looked at Chad and said, then the notifications were required, not unauthorized. Chad said she was clearly trying to. Garrett said she was performing a contractual obligation. The room got very quiet. Garrett then asked Rachel to repeat the revenue exposure numbers. She did. He looked at Matt and said, I'd like to understand why the executive who held the contracts on 46% of our revenue was offered a downgrade instead of a promotion. Matt said something about revenue architecture and scalability. Garrett looked at him in the way board directors look at CEOs when they want to convey that they are exhausted by the packaging and would prefer the content. Then Garrett said, get her on the phone. Not see if she's available. Not have legal reach out through counsel. Get her on the phone. Rachel called me at 6:22 p.m. Garrett Lee wants to meet with you, she said. Tomorrow. Here or wherever you prefer. Paul's office, I said. 10 a.m. I'll tell them. A pause. Diana. Yes. For what it's worth, she said, Carol Westbrook asked for you by name. I know. That's not nothing. No, I said. It's exactly what it is. The Friday meeting was in Paul's conference room on the 4th floor of a building downtown that smelled like good coffee and old carpet and the particular seriousness of a room where real conversations happen. Garrett Lee sat across from me with Steven and Rachel. Matt was on a video call from his office, which told me something about his current confidence level. Chad was not there. Garrett was 61, compact, wore a dark blazer and no tie, and had the unhurried posture of a man who had been in enough of these rooms to know that patience was the most powerful chair to sit in. He looked at me directly and said, tell me what you built. Not what happened. Not your side of things. What you built. So I told him. The client anchor protocol. The DRC clause. The 3 accounts. The 11 years. The renewal values. The clause I had introduced to protect client continuity and the effect it had produced when the organization I had protected disappeared from underneath it. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, and the downgrade offer. Senior account manager, I said. $134,000 to $158,000. He looked at Rachel. Rachel nodded. He said, "What would it take to stabilize the OmniLink and Bexler situations? Those are already in renegotiation. The 90-day window is running. If you are back in a senior capacity, the window doesn't close automatically. The clients would need to agree to resume under renegotiation or sign a new consent. Would they? I believe Hartfield and Bexler would, if the terms were right. OmniLink's Frank Daly is more measured. He might use the window to get better pricing regardless." Garrett looked at Stephen. Stephen said, "We believe direct engagement by a reinstated DRC would give us the best chance at OmniLink's consent within 30 days. Garrett looked back at me. "What are you willing to do?" That sentence. The right question from the right seat. I told him. I would not return under Chad Brenly in any reporting structure. If Chad remained EVP of Revenue, I would not return. My title would be Chief Relationship Officer, reporting directly to the CEO and the board. My compensation, $340,000 base, matching Chad's, plus $50,000 signing acknowledgement for the disruption and 0.5% equity. My team, the 2 senior account managers Chad had replaced, would be offered reinstatement at their original compensation. I would rebuild the enterprise relationship function on my terms and timeline. The revenue architecture consulting firm Chad had brought in would be dismissed. And I would have full authority over any contract language governing enterprise accounts going forward. Matt's small video window went very still. Stephen started to say something about some of the equity terms. I said, Paul. Paul put a printed sheet on the table. It was a preliminary calculation of Corrigan's exposure if OmniLink exited at the end of the 90-day window, triggering a competitive rebid, and one of the other 2 accounts used the momentum to renegotiate pricing by 15%. $19.3 million in ARR reduction. Over 3 years, $57.9 million. Garrett looked at the sheet. Then he looked at Matt's video window. Matt said, "Let me speak with Chad." Garrett said, "I'll give you the weekend." He gave him 52 hours. Monday morning, Paul received a signed term sheet from Corrigan. All conditions accepted. Chad Brenly was moved laterally to a new business development role with no authority over existing enterprise accounts. The title was still EVP level. The authority was not. He remained because Matt still ran the company and Matt still liked Chad. But Chad no longer had anything to do with the clients I had spent 11 years building. The permanent damage was real and specific and would sit in Corrigan's financial history for the duration of any serious due diligence process. OmniLink used the 90-day renegotiation window fully. Frank Daly was professional and fair, but he was also a good procurement executive, and good procurement executives use leverage when they have it. The OmniLink renewal came in at $12.8 million annually, down from $15 million. That was a $2.2 million annual reduction on a 3-year term. A total of $6.6 million in contracted value gone. Not because Frank was hostile. Because the window existed, the continuity had been interrupted, and he had 3 competitors calling him. Bexler renewed with consent once I was reinstated. No price change. But the relationship had a small fracture in it that required 6 months of careful work to close, and during that time one upsell opportunity, a new exception management module worth approximately $800,000 in year 1 revenue, died quietly because their internal champion had moved on while the account was in limbo. Hartfield renewed cleanly. Carol Westbrook had given us the conditional consent precisely because she trusted me and wanted continuity. That trust was worth, over the following 2 years, $3.1 million in expanded scope that had been in proposal stages before Chad's reorganization froze everything. The consulting firm's engagement fee, $220,000. The rehire and compensation restoration costs for the 2 senior account managers Chad had replaced, $94,000 in arrears and salary adjustments. Legal fees across the DRC clause dispute, employment matter, and board session, $380,000. Total financial cost of Chad's 7-month tenure in the role I had been promised, $8.1 million, measured conservatively, not counting opportunity cost or the relational erosion that does not show up on a CFO's model. They had promoted him to save themselves the discomfort of promoting me. He cost them $8.1 million. I rebuilt the function they should have given me in the first place. The thing they had treated as farming. I took the title. I took the team. I took the equity. Then I did the work. My first 6 months as Chief Relationship Officer were not a victory lap. They were construction. We rebuilt the enterprise relationship model from the operational level up. I brought in both reinstated account managers, a woman named Tess Bohannon who had managed Bexler's subsidiary brands with quiet precision for 6 years before Chad let her go, and a man named Derek Chu who had been the primary contact for Hartfield's regional hub operations and who Carol Westbrook had specifically mentioned wanting restored. We developed a formal account health scoring methodology that ran quarterly and fed directly into renewal forecasting. We integrated the CRM with actual client operational data rather than sales pipeline abstractions, which required 3 months of systems work and produced a reporting layer that Rachel Huang described as the first model she had trusted in a year. We also updated the client anchor protocol, not to strengthen my personal position, to institutionalize the concept. The new protocol identified 2 co-designated relationship custodians per account, myself and a trained secondary, so that the function was resilient and did not depend on any single person. That was the part one was most proud of. Because the lesson was not that I should remain irreplaceable forever. The lesson was that the company had never bothered to understand what it actually had until it lost it, and the solution was not to make the knowledge scarce again, but to build a structure where the knowledge survived. About 14 months into the new role, I was reviewing contract documents on a Tuesday morning when my phone showed a LinkedIn notification. Chad Brenley had posted a new position. VP of Business Development at a venture-backed supply chain startup in Denver. His title at Corrigan had apparently stopped being interesting enough to stay for. I noted the notification, put the phone face down, and went back to the Hartfield expansion proposal I was drafting. 2 weeks later, I was in Columbus Business First, a regional business publication, in a piece about women in enterprise technology leadership. The reporter had asked me about the revenue recovery Corrigan had managed after what she described, carefully, as a period of internal reorganization. I said it was a team effort. I meant it. The article ran on a Thursday. By Saturday morning, I had 17 LinkedIn connection requests. 3 recruiting messages from companies I was at least 4 years away from being ready to consider. 1 message from OmniLink's Frank Daly, who said simply, "Good piece. Talk next month about the new module?" That message was the one I liked best. Not the article. Not the connection requests. Just a client trusting me enough to plan forward. That was the architecture. They thought competence was patience waiting to be promoted. What they didn't know was that patience was just the part they could see. The part they couldn't see was already in the contract. If you've ever done the invisible work for 11 years while watching someone else get the title you built, like and subscribe. And drop a comment telling me about the moment you realized loyalty was always meant to be a one-way street at your old company and what you did about it. For me, the answer was a clause in Section 12.4 of 3 master service agreements. For you, it might be something else entirely. But I promise you this. If you built it correctly, it is already there. You just have to let them discover it.